Okay, time now to take a look at what's making headlines in the international papers. Our own Alison Sargent has been scouring them for us. Hi, Alison. Now, one thing we've been talking about quite a bit, and it's taking over a lot of page space as well. It's a new era in Cuba.
That's right, Eve. It's the first time in almost 60 years that Cuba is no longer going to be led by a Castro. And there's a cartoon that sort of illustrates this power handoff today from the Chicago Tribune. This is a cartoon by Scott Stantis. We can see there a Cuban cigar representing Castro rule being passed along by a somewhat emaciated-looking Cuba, suggesting sort of that those Castro years really did take quite a toll. It's a critical cartoon, but are things really as bad as all that? Well, French paper Le Monde takes stock of the past 10 years under Raul Castro in this article, and while they say he didn't put Castroism into question, he did profoundly transform the lives of Cubans in the past 10 years. He allowed them to get computers and cell phones, for example. Over a third of Cubans now have them, almost half of Cubans. The country also now has a small private business sector, which is new. But Le Monde says he still, never really took his foot off of the ideological brake. The Communist Party still has a total monopoly in politics and in the media. And Le Monde concludes that the Castros seem to have been operating under the motto, everything must change so that nothing changes.
And indeed, the man set to replace him is his current vice president, who, as the National Assembly was voted in a short while ago, said the revolution must go on. So a lot of people are saying not much is going to change.
That's right. Critics are really kind of saying that this is all just a show, really. There's an article in the Miami Herald, actually, where Miami's a city where there are a lot of Cuban exiles, people who left during the revolution. And this article is written by a journalist whose parents were part of that group that fled Cuba when Castro took over. She says, as a Cuban exile, she has spent really a lifetime waiting for the day when Castro rule would end and democracy would reign. But she says this is not that day. She says not only is Raul Castro going to remain the head of the Communist Party and the armed forces, but also his son remains a key figure in the Interior Ministry. And she says handing power to someone else is actually kind of an old ruse in Cuba. It's something that dates back to the Cuban Revolution, according to her. She says Fidel Castro himself didn't take the presidency right away. He first called the shots as the prime minister. And there's a cartoon from a Cuban newspaper, actually, that illustrates quite nicely sort of how little is expected to change. You can see there a power handoff. So the power is changing hands, but if you scroll up and see what power is changing hands, well, there we have, a sign that you can see, any direction you pick, things are going to stay the same, more socialism.
Well, let's move on now, Alison, to Iraq, where a suspected French jihadist has been sentenced to 20 years in prison.
That's right, and she had a lightning-fast trial, according to Le Parisien. It lasted only 25 minutes. The paper had correspondents at this trial in Baghdad, and journalists spoke to the woman afterwards, and she begged them to help her return to France. You can see a picture of her there in the Parisien. Her name is Jamila Boutoutaou. She's only 28 years old, and she swears that she herself is a victim and that she only went to Iraq and Syria to fight with the Islamic State because her husband made her do it. That argument did not convince judges in Iraq, although, but it did allow her to escape the death penalty. As I said, that trial lasted just 25 minutes, which Le Parisien says is, really so short when so much is at stake. But it's actually very long compared to a lot of women who have been on trial in Iraq. If you take a look at this article from the New York Times, you realize that she's also incredibly lucky not to have gotten the death penalty there. They say 10-minute trial, a death sentence. And they say, the New York Times reports that actually within just 2 hours, 14 women were sentenced to death yesterday, the majority of them Turkish. Many of them also have babies and young children, and it's sort of unclear what's going to happen to their kids. Now, obviously, there's a lot of hate for the Islamic State group, and these women, were presumably associated with them. But the New York Times reports that these women really are not getting fair trials, and that's the bottom line. And one representative from Human Rights Watch told the paper that the presumption is because you're foreign and you're in ISIS territory, there's no need to provide more evidence.
I have to say that the speed of those trials does sound quite alarming. Finally, Ansa, let's move on to something a little bit brighter to end this press review. And I'm looking at the front page of L'Équipe. It's all about sport, but boy, do they look happy. The French Cup.
That's right. This is the Coupe de France, which is not to be confused with the French Ligue 1, which is kind of the top-tier teams playing against each other. This is really a tournament for all of the teams in France, all of the different levels. And what's getting so much attention this year is that for the first time, two teams from the third league, so the lowest league, League 3, have fought against each other in the semifinals. And the winner from that game last night was a team from the Vendée region. They're called Les Herbiers. So that's why you can see L'Équipe on its front page is celebrating them. They say La Vendée au paradis, so the Vendée is in heaven after this game. They have a big challenge ahead, though. They'll be playing either Caen or Paris Saint-Germain in the big final. Paris Saint-Germain, as we know, is one of the teams that has the most money in France and I think in the world. And the Herbiers, on the other hand, is a league, it's a League 3 team. They're from a really tiny town. And Le Figaro writes here that their success actually reminds us really what football is all about. It's about real talent. It's about teamwork. It's not about money. So in short, it's the sport of the people. And Le Figaro would really love to see Les Herbiers go up against PSG and beat them. And I have to say...
Yeah, I have to say,
I'd like to see that too.
But I'd quite like to see the underdogs get there. Alison Sargent, thanks a lot for that review of the international papers. Time for us to take a very quick break now, but still to come in this edition, our Focus Report looks back at the last 60 years in Cuba as it prepares for a new president, 86-year-old Raúl Castro, stepping down this week.